Okay, let's unpack this. There are some disasters, some moments in history that just never let go of us. And the sinking of the RMS Titanic on April 15th, 1912. That's probably at the top of the list.
It really is. It's this perfect storm of technology, ambition, human error, and just the raw power of nature.
But alongside that official story, the ship, the iceberg, the tragedy, there's always been this other version, a kind of shadow history.
The infamous switch theory.
And the claim at its heart is just. It's mind-boggling. It alleges that the ship that sank wasn't the new RMS Titanic at all.
No. The theory states it was her older sister ship, the RMS Olympic, which had been damaged in an earlier collision.
So the whole thing was a massive, pre-planned insurance scam.
Orchestrated, allegedly, by the White Star Line, and really by the man pulling the strings, J.P. Morgan and his shipping trust, the IMM. The idea was to secretly swap the ships, sink the damaged one, and then collect a huge insurance payout on the brand new one.
Which is why we're not just retelling the story today. This is, well, it's a forensic audit.
Yeah.
We're going to take the biggest claims of the switch theory and really test them.
Exactly. We'll be looking at everything from naval architecture blueprints and deep-sea archaeology to the simple economics of the Edwardian era.
Our goal here isn't just to say it's true or false. It's to dig into why this theory is so persistent and show you the specific physical evidence that ultimately, well, sinks it.
To really get it, you have to picture the world it came from, the early 1900s. The North Atlantic wasn't just a shipping lane. It was a battlefield.
A commercial battlefield.
Absolutely. And the war was between Cunard and White Star. It was the biggest corporate rivalry of the age.
And they had totally different philosophies. Then.
Completely different. Cunard was all about speed. They had the Lusitania and the Mauretania, these absolute greyhounds of the sea. They held the blue ribbon for the fastest Atlantic crossing.
So they were the sports cars.
They were. And White Star, backed by Morgan's money, made a different bet. They decided, the super wealthy, the American millionaires, they don't want to be rattled and shaken just to save a few hours. They want comfort.
They want a floating palace.
A floating palace. That was the entire concept behind the Olympic-class ships. The Olympic, the Titanic, and later the Britannic. They were built for size, for stability, for luxury.
But it wasn't just about champagne and fine dining for the first-class passengers.
Oh, not at all. That was the prestige, the marketing, the real money, the bread and butter of the operation was the sheer volume of immigrants they could pack into steerage.
So they needed that massive size for both ends of the market.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's why the investment was so huge.
What kind of numbers are we talking about here back in 1912 money?
You're looking at about £1.5 million sterling per ship. So around $7.5 million US dollars at the time. An astronomical sum.
This wasn't a short-term gamble then.
No, this was the foundation of their business model for the next generation. For this to pay off, these ships needed to sail fully booked for 20, maybe 25 years. That was the plan.
Okay, so everything is going according to this grand plan. But then we get to the event that supposedly provides the motive for this entire conspiracy, the catalyst.
September 20th, 1911, the RMS Olympic is leaving Southampton. At the helm is a very experienced captain, Edward Smith.
The same captain who would later go down with the Titanic.
The very same. And as she's navigating the Solent, a narrow channel, she has a collision with a Royal Navy cruiser, the HMS Hawk.
And this isn't just a minor fender bender. We're talking about some serious physics at play.
Very serious. It's a classic case of what naval architects call interaction or suction. The Olympic is enormous, displacing about 45,000 tons.
Just a monster.
A monster. And as she moves, she pushes a huge amount of water aside, creating a low-pressure zone right alongside her hull. The HMS Hawk, which was much smaller, about 7,000 tons, gets caught in it.
So it's literally sucked in.
It's pulled in, almost like a magnet. The cruiser can't steer away, and the Hawk had one very dangerous feature.
Its bow.
Its reinforced ram bow. It was designed for one purpose: to punch holes in enemy warships.
And it did its job on the Olympic.
It did. It struck the Olympic starboard quarter, tearing a huge gash in the hull and critically bending one of her massive propeller shafts.
Now this right here, this is the moment the conspiracy theorists seize on.
This is ground zero for the theory. Robin Gardner and others argue that this damage was far more severe than reported. They claim it actually bent or twisted the ship's keel.
The spine of the ship?
Exactly, the foundational beam running along the very bottom. Their argument is that this made the Olympic structurally unsound, a total write-off, and, essentially worthless.
But what does the actual forensic evidence from the time say? the shipyard reports.
The forensic reality is, well, it's much less dramatic. The damage, while serious, was localized. The ram hit high up on the side of the ship. The keel is at the very bottom.
So it's physically unlikely that an impact there could twist the whole frame of the ship.
It's basically impossible. The force wouldn't transmit that way. And if the keel had been bent, the ship would have been a nightmare to operate forever after. Constant vibrations, alignment issues. It would have been a known lemon.
And we know it wasn't.
We know it wasn't. In fact, to speed up the repairs, the shipyard, Harland and Wolff, actually took parts that were ready for the Titanic, a new propeller shaft, some steel plating, and used them on the Olympic.
So they cannibalized the Titanic to fix her sister.
Yes, and that's what caused the delay in Titanic's maiden voyage. But the point is, the Olympic was repaired in weeks, not months, and was back in service, making money.
And not just in service, but she went on to have a very long, very demanding career.
A brutally demanding career. She served for 4 years in World War I as a troop transport, carrying tens of thousands of soldiers through U-boat-infested waters. She even rammed and sank a German submarine. A ship with a bent keel, a compromised spine would have broken apart under that kind of stress. Her service record alone disproves the central premise of the conspiracy.
Okay, so the physical damage was bad, but fixable. What about the financial damage? The theorists say this is where the real motive lies.
This is their backup argument. The Admiralty Court investigated the collision and found the Olympic was at fault.
How come?
They basically said a vessel that large, creating that much suction, had a greater responsibility to navigate carefully in a narrow channel.
And being found at fault had major financial consequences.
Huge. It meant White Star was on the hook for repairing the HMS Hawk. And worse, it meant their own insurance wouldn't cover the full cost of the Olympics repairs.
So what was the total bill? The loss.
All in repairs, lost revenue from canceled voyages, it came to about £125,000.
Which in 1912 is a lot of money.
It's a very significant sum. And this is what the theorists claim was the wound that was so deep, so painful, that it drove a titan like J.P. Morgan to orchestrate this incredibly complex and risky fraud.
But you have to put that number in context, right?
Yeah.
How much was IMM, Morgan's company, actually worth?
I mean, we're talking about a colossal multinational trust. £125,000 was a sting. It was a bad day at the office, a painful line item in the quarterly report.
It wasn't a company killer.
Not even close. It was a manageable loss. The idea that J.P. Morgan would risk his entire North Atlantic shipping empire, his reputation, and potential jail time over a sum that amounted to less than 10% of the value of just one of his ships, it just defies all economic logic.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you set aside the emotion and just look at the raw numbers of the alleged fraud, the motive completely collapses.
It really does. It's a masterclass in bad business.
Okay, so let's walk through the math. What did it cost to build the Titanic?
The asset value, the construction cost, was about £1.5 million.
And what was the ship insured for? The maximum payout they could possibly get.
This is a matter of public record. She was insured for £1 million.
Wait, so the plan, the grand scheme, was to deliberately destroy a 1.5 million 𝐾𝐂 asset.
A brand new state-of-the-art asset with a 25-year earning potential.
To collect only £1 million in insurance.
Correct. The fraud begins with a guaranteed immediate net loss of £500,000.
That's before you even pay the bribes, the overtime for the secret work, the hush money. How is that a profitable crime?
It isn't. It's a financially insane proposition. The only way it makes sense is if you believe the first premise that the Olympic was truly worthless, a total write-off, and they were just trying to recoup something.
But we already know that's not true because she sailed for another 24 years.
Exactly. The premise is false, which makes a financial motive nonsensical. And then you have to consider the opportunity cost.
The money they would have made.
Right. It is infinitely more profitable to repair a ship for a fraction of its value and then have it generate revenue for 2 decades than it is to sink it for a one-time payment that doesn't even cover the cost of building its replacement. The whole thing is a valuation paradox.
And beyond the balance sheet, there was the unbelievable risk. Yep, the liability.
The risk was, for all intents and purposes, infinite. Think about it. One disgruntled shipyard worker, one misplaced document, one deathbed confession years later.
And the whole thing unravels.
And J.P. Morgan, Bruce Ismay, the chairman of White Star, every single person involved is facing charges of mass murder and fraud. The company would be dissolved overnight. the brand wiped from existence.
And ironically, the actual sinking showed just how big that liability could be.
It did. The loss of life led to lawsuits totaling over $16 million in U.S. courts alone.
$16 million.
That's a sum that completely dwarfs the £1 million insurance payout they were supposedly after. The downside so massively outweighed the upside, which, as we've established, was already a massive loss. No rational executive signs off on that.
Okay, so the motive is shaky at best. Let's talk about the how. The actual logistics of swapping two 46,000-ton ships in secret.
This is where the theory moves from financially illogical to physically impossible.
What was the timeline? When could this even have happened?
There was only one very, very narrow window. A few weeks in late 1911, early 1912, the Olympic was in the shipyard in Belfast for her repairs right next to the Titanic, which was in the final stages of being fitted out.
So one was a fully operational finished ship, and the other was still basically a construction site inside.
A very advanced construction site, but yes, a shell being filled in. To make the swap, you would have to simultaneously strip the Olympic of all its identity and unique fittings, while at the same time accelerating the completion of the Titanic and rebranding it as the Olympic.
We're not just talking about swapping the lifeboats with the names on them.
Oh, heavens no. You'd have to change thousands of monogrammed items, sure, the china, the linens, the silver. But the real work is structural. These were sister ships, but they weren't identical twins. There were subtle and not so subtle differences in their construction.
Which would require a huge amount of labor.
And that's the human factor, the sociological impossibility. You would need hundreds, maybe even thousands, of riveters, welders, carpenters, electricians, all working around the clock on a top-secret project.
In Belfast, a city where everyone knows everyone, and the shipyard is the center of the universe.
A city that took immense pride in these ships. They were a symbol of Belfast's engineering genius. The idea that thousands of these proud working-class men would all agree to take part in a criminal conspiracy of this magnitude.
And then keep it a secret for the rest of their lives.
For their entire lives. No deathbed confessions, no letters to a loved one, no diaries. No one ever broke the code of silence. It's not plausible.
But even if you could somehow guarantee the silence of thousands of people, there's a final hurdle you can't get over. The ship's own DNA.
The yard numbers. Olympic was yard number 400. Titanic was yard number 401.
And these numbers aren't just painted on.
No, they are stamped, physically pressed, into the metal of nearly every single component of the ship during its construction.
Give me a sense of the scale here. Where would you find these numbers?
Everywhere. Stamped into the steel frames that make up the skeleton of the hull, on the engine blocks, the propeller blades, the anchor chains, even on the back of the fancy wood paneling in the first-class staterooms.
On the back of the paneling?
Yes, so the joiners knew which custom-cut piece of oak went into which cabin on which ship.
So to pull off the switch, you would have to hunt down and change tens of thousands of these tiny stamped numbers deep in the guts of both ships.
You'd have to rip the ships apart from the inside out. And if you missed just one stamp on a valve in the engine room, one number on a frame behind a wall, it would be discovered at the next refit. The whole fraud would be exposed instantly. It is the ultimate logistical nightmare.
So the best witness against the conspiracy is actually the wreck itself, lying at the bottom of the Atlantic.
It's the ultimate arbiter of the truth, because the Titanic wasn't just a carbon copy of the Olympic. She was an upgrade, a version 2.0, with specific documented structural changes.
Let's start with the most obvious one, something you can see in photos of the ship leaving port, the A-deck promenade.
This is maybe the clearest visual proof. On the Olympic, the first-class promenade on A-deck was open to the elements for its entire length, and passengers complained. It was windy, it was cold, they got hit with sea spray.
Not very luxurious.
Not at all. So Bruce Ismay, who was obsessed with passenger comfort, ordered a change for the Titanic.
What did they do?
They enclosed the forward half of the A-deck promenade with a permanent steel screen fitted with big sliding glass windows. It was a major structural addition, and it's often called the Ismay Screen.
And for the switch theory to be true, the ship that sank, the damaged Olympic, would have had to have this unique screen.
It would have. And when you look at the images from the wreck, the deep-sea photography of the bow section,
You can see it.
you can clearly see the remains of that enclosed screen. The steel framework is still there. The window openings are still there. It's a structural fingerprint that screams Titanic.
And the differences get even more fundamental as you go down the decks.
Yes, the changes to B-deck are even more significant structurally. On the Olympic, B deck had another promenade, but it was set back from the hull. The cabins had windows that looked out onto this walkway, not the ocean.
And the designer saw an opportunity there.
They saw unused premium real estate. On Titanic, they did away with that promenade and extended the most expensive staterooms right out to the side of the ship.
These are the so-called millionaire suites.
That's them. Huge, lavish suites with their own private enclosed promenades. These were the most desirable cabins on the ocean.
And changing the inside layout like that must have changed the outside appearance.
It had to. Because the new suites were all different sizes, the windows and portholes on the outside of the hull couldn't be evenly spaced anymore. They had to be placed irregularly to match the new floor plan.
So the Titanic has a unique, uneven pattern of windows on B deck.
A completely unique pattern. And if you look at photos of the wreck, that specific irregular spacing is clearly visible. It's an architectural signature. It proves the ship on the seabed is yard number 401.
Amazing. And there are even smaller details, right? Things that almost no one would notice.
Oh, yes. Down to the tiniest improvements. On sea deck, the crew on the Olympic had complained about how hot the galleys were.
And so for Titanic.
The architects just added 2 extra portholes on the forecastle for better ventilation. The Olympic had 14 in that section. The Titanic had 16.
And the wreck.
The wreck has 16 portholes. It's a tiny detail, but it's another piece of consistent proof.
It all just keeps adding up.
It does. And it goes deeper. The routing of ventilation pipes on the boat deck, the layout of the Turkish baths on F deck, all of these were subtly changed and improved for Titanic. And in every single case, the configuration we see on the wreck matches the Titanic's blueprints, not the Olympics.
Okay, we've covered the logistics, the motive, the visible structure.
Yeah.
But now we get to the evidence that is just. It's absolute. The smoking gun.
The smoking gun is made of bronze, and it's lying on the seabed. It's the starboard propeller.
And these things weren't just anonymous pieces of equipment.
No, a propeller is a massive, custom-engineered casting, and stamped into it at the foundry are all its key specifications, including the most important one of all, the yard number of the ship it was made for.
And the deep-sea expeditions have gotten clear images of this propeller.
High-resolution, undeniable images, and stamped right there into the metal, you can clearly read the number 401.
401. Titanic.
401. Titanic. The Olympic was 400. There is no ambiguity. There is no room for interpretation. It is the ship's birth certificate, and it's lying right there for all to see. To swap those propellers would have been a monumental, documented task. It's the final, definitive nail in the coffin of the switch theory.
And this brings us to another one of the big visual claims of the theory. The name on the bow. The idea that the name Titanic was just a plate screwed on over the name Olympic.
Yes, the claim is that you can see the letters M and P from Olympic showing through where the letters A, N of Titanic have supposedly fallen off.
But this is based on a complete misunderstanding of how they named ships back then.
A fundamental misunderstanding. White Star didn't use nameplates. The name of the ship was incised. It was physically carved deep into the steel plates of the hull itself.
Carved into the steel.
And then painted over for visibility. So it is physically impossible for letters to fall off and reveal different letters underneath. The letters are part of the hull.
So what are people seeing in those photos?
They're seeing shadows and resticles, those formations of rust, and their minds are creating patterns. It's pareidolia. Later expeditions with better cameras, like Robert Ballard's, got crystal clear shots showing TITANIC carved right into the bow.
Another piece of visual evidence that gets brought up is the gray paint.
Right, the idea that patches of gray paint on the wreck prove it's the Olympic, because she was painted gray when she was a troop ship in World War I.
But the timeline doesn't work.
The timeline is completely wrong. The sinking was in 1912. The Olympic was painted gray after 1914. In 1912, both ships were painted black.
So what is the gray paint they're seeing on the wreck?
It's the primer. It's the standard lead-based primer coat that the shipyard applied to all the steel to prevent corrosion before they put on the final black top coat. Of course, you'd see the primer after a century of the black paint eroding away. It's exactly what you would expect to see on a ship from that era.
So to keep the theory alive, it has to pull in other peripheral mysteries surrounding the sinking.
Exactly. It weaves them into the narrative to make them seem like part of the plot, rather than just tragic coincidences or human errors.
And the biggest one of these is the political assassination theory. This shifts the motive from simple insurance fraud to something much darker.
Much darker. This version claims that J.P. Morgan, who famously canceled his passage on the maiden voyage at the last minute, arranged the sinking to get rid of three powerful enemies:
John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus.
The theory paints them as the three main opponents to Morgan's plan to create the U.S. Federal Reserve. He supposedly needed them out of the way.
But when you check the history on that, the claim just falls apart.
It completely evaporates. For starters, Isidor Straus, the owner of Macy's, was actually a public supporter of banking reform. He was on Morgan's side, not against him.
Okay, so one of the targets wasn't a target.
Right. And as for Astor and Guggenheim, there's just no evidence they were leading the opposition to the Federal Reserve Act in any meaningful way. They weren't the key obstacles Morgan needed to eliminate.
And the timing is all wrong, too.
The Federal Reserve Act wasn't passed until December 1913. That's a year and a half after the Titanic sank. The idea that Morgan would sink his own flagship and kill 1,500 people to eliminate rivals for a vote that was 18 months away, it's just absurd.
Plus, there's no guarantee they would die. Bruce Ismay survived. Why wouldn't they?
It's the world's most inefficient assassination plot.
And then there's the story of the SS Californian, the mystery ship that was nearby but failed to come to the rescue.
The Californian is one of the great tragedies within the tragedy. The conspiracy theory tries to explain the inaction of its captain, Stanley Lord, by claiming he was in on the plot.
The idea being that the Californian was the designated getaway car, basically, the rescue ship.
Yes, and to support this, there's a myth that its cargo hold was full of wool sweaters and blankets for the survivors.
But the ship's manifest tells a different story.
The manifest is very clear. It was a standard freighter carrying cotton, lumber, machinery, a totally normal cargo. There was no secret stash of emergency supplies.
And if Captain Lord was supposed to be the rescuer, his actions make absolutely no sense.
His actions are the exact opposite of what a co-conspirator would do. He stopped his ship for the night because of the ice. He saw the distress rockets but dismissed them. He let his wireless operator go to bed.
He did everything wrong.
He did everything wrong if he was supposed to be saving people. His behavior points not to complicity, but to a catastrophic failure of judgment, of communication, and of basic duty. It's a story of incompetence, not conspiracy.
And what about the claim that the ship they saw wasn't the Titanic, but a small Norwegian sealing vessel, the Samson?
That's the Samson alibi. It's been thoroughly debunked. Shipping records and logs show the Samson was docked in Iceland at the time of the sinking. With its top speed of only 6 knots, it was physically impossible for it to have been anywhere near the collision site.
So it's another dead end.
It is. The ship the Californian saw that night was, tragically, the Titanic.
Finally, you have the small anomalies that get blown up into acts of sabotage, like the missing binoculars for the lookouts.
A classic example of human error being twisted into malice. The lookouts didn't have binoculars. Why? Because the key to the locker where they were kept was accidentally taken ashore by an officer, David Blair.
He was reassigned at the last minute, right?
Yes, just hours before sailing. In the rush to pack his things and leave the ship, he forgot to hand over the key. It was a simple, stupid mistake with devastating consequences. It wasn't sabotage.
And the fire in the coal bunker. The claim is that it weakened the hull right where the iceberg hit.
There was a fire, that's true. It had been smoldering in coal bunker #6 since the ship left Belfast. This was actually pretty common due to spontaneous combustion.
But it had a very strange, paradoxical effect on the sinking.
It did. To control the fire, the stokers had to empty that bunker first, moving all the coal from the starboard side to the furnaces. This gave the ship a slight list to port when it left port.
So it was leaning a little to the left.
And when the iceberg hit and flooded the starboard side, that huge weight of coal still on the port side acted as a counterbalance. It probably kept the ship on a more even keel for longer than it otherwise would have been.
Which might have actually bought them more time.
It may well have bought them precious extra minutes to launch more lifeboats. So the fire, far from being the weapon of sabotage, might have inadvertently saved lives. And its presence is yet another specific documented detail unique to the Titanic's maiden voyage. And so our forensic audit comes to a close. And when you lay out all the evidence, the switch theory it completely disintegrates.
On every single front. The physical evidence on the wreck is absolute. The ship on the ocean floor has the Ismay Screen on A deck and the unique window pattern of the Millionaire Suites on B deck.
The forensic proof is undeniable. Yard number 401 is stamped on the propeller. The logistical challenge of the swap is, frankly, insurmountable. The idea of thousands of men keeping a secret of that magnitude for a century is just not credible.
And most importantly, the motive is just not there. The map doesn't work. J.T. Morgan was a ruthless capitalist, yes, but he wasn't a stupid one. He would never have signed off on a plan that started with a £500,000 loss and risked the complete destruction of his empire.
The sinking of the Titanic was a tragedy, a horrific, preventable tragedy. It was born of hubris, a reckless obsession with speed, and a fatal underestimation of the power of nature. It doesn't need a conspiracy to make it compelling. The truth is devastating enough.
So that leaves the big question. If the evidence against it is so overwhelming, why does this theory stick around? Why do people want to believe it?
I think it's because a conspiracy, in a strange way, is comforting.
Comforting. How so?
An accident, a random encounter with a piece of ice in the dark, is meaningless. It's chaotic. It tells us the universe is indifferent. But a crime has a narrative. It has villains and motives and a structure. It makes sense, even if it's a terrible kind of sense.
It transforms a random tragedy into an orderly plot. It gives us a sense of control, or at least understanding.
Exactly. The switch theory persists not because of the evidence, but because of the deep human need for a good story.
And that leads us to our final thought for you to take away. What other historical tragedy, if you reframe it from a senseless accident into a calculated conspiracy, suddenly feels more, well, more psychologically satisfying? We'll let you chew on that one. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.